This podcast is brought to you by Osprey Approach. In conveyancing, fixed fees mean every minute counts. Too much admin eats into your profits, and inefficiencies slow transactions down. Osprey Approach is a legal software built for law firms, helping conveyancers stay in control by managing cases, accounts, documents, and compliance all in one place. From automated client updates to post-completion workflows, Osprey streamlines every step, cutting admin time and keeping transactions moving. Osprey Approach. We make running a law firm easier.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. Today we're talking all about lead generation, marketing, the future of how we might acquire clients, and I've got co-founders of Conveyancer Plus, PJ Singh and George Levett, on the discussion with me. Great to have you both on the podcast. George, you're actually doing this from the other side of the world, aren't you? Based in Australia.
Yes, I'm in Sydney right now, and it works quite well with a UK-based company because PJ clocks off and then I clock on, so it's just the continual cycle. We're always
24 hours a day.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah. Could be our tagline, Conveyancer Plus, always on. I'm not sure yet, but we're thinking about it.
It's not a bad tagline, to be fair.
Yeah.
In the first instance, PJ, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Conveyancer Plus, please.
As you rightly mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Conveyancer Plus. Our focus, or my focus specifically, is more on the sales and business development side and the growth side of the company. So we work primarily with conveyancing-focused law firms and almost act as the outsourced firm-branded teams to be able to convert their leads organically and otherwise into confirmed instructions with paid clients. So that's essentially sort of what we do as a company. There's more sort of facets to what we do in terms of obviously generating relationships with business development or with referrers, such as estate agents and introducers, but that's essentially sort of my role.
Thank you. And over to you, George.
There's a little bit more than that as well. He stresses me out quite a bit. But from my side, I look after the marketing and tech sort of operations. My background is digital marketing, and as a part of running sales, we leverage kind of like the best tools in the industry. So my role is, as well as marketing, like promoting us Conveyancer Plus to conveyancers. It's also just keeping us at the cutting edge of marketing automations, ensuring that our communications is best outreach, and ensuring that our sales team are getting on the best quality calls that they can.
Great, thank you. Well, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way first, please.
Yeah.
This isn't necessarily panel management, is it? Or is it?
I would probably say not. This is more of a support service to law firms. Look, we know the struggles of law, of most of the law firms that try and sort of adopt their own sales teams and the sales function. It is not easy, and it's hugely expensive. If you're looking to hire the right sort of people, constantly train them, get the right sort of tools and the resources in place to maintain, that function within a firm, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. So what we tend to find with law firms that try and do this, there's a revolving door of people that come in, they go out because it's just not right for them. Getting the right sort of people in place to be able to convert those leads into qualified instructions. It requires quite a bit of hard work. It requires constant training, constant monitoring. Luckily, we've been in a position where, for example, if you're talking about myself, I've been in panel management, started around about sort of 13 years ago. I've also worked within a law firm capacity as well. So I understand sort of some of the challenges that law firms tend to face. But no, so I wouldn't probably consider myself as panel management, but we take the best bits from panel management, which is more sort of the communication, the marketing style, and basically push that into a law firm setting. So as a result, what you get is ultimately a process or a service. We can set up a team to act as a quotes team or a new business team on behalf of a law firm, so they can organically take on more work at their own fees and start basically taking control of their own incoming work that they bring in.
And we were chatting just before actually we started recording. We're talking at a time when there's so much emphasis on pricing transparency, on just transparency in general around the transaction. How does a service like this work in tandem with that? Because there's a huge amount of criticism of services like this and panel management as well, where the consumer's losing out simply because they don't see where the increase in pricing is. And of course, there's some new regulations that are coming into play around creating greater transparency for consumers.
Oh, transparency is absolutely key. I think one of our mantras at the moment is when our teams speak to clients, we have to make it very clear from the outset basically what's happening and what's going to happen as a next step. So setting those right sort of expectations, in the right way is absolutely key. So for us, it's no different on the price transparency side. I think what you tend to find now is a lot of generally sort of first time buyers, they go online, they try and get a quote online, but they get a quote from multiple places, and all those different places give you different information. So it can be a little bit confusing. What we try and do, we try and make things really sort of dead clear. I think it's important to speak to the client about something that's quite, complex in their eyes, but in relation to price transparency element of it, yes, you're right. A lot of firms are now adopting this on their websites. They're making it sort of clear that this is what their charges are. And we want to take advantage of that. We want that law firm to basically generate their own work organically. And I think that's really, really important just for their survival. If you're looking at sort of the way that the world is moving with AI and people going online and stuff, it's not the same as it was sort of 15, 20 years ago. If you're going to do that, we need to make sure that we've got the right information. A lot of the regulators are trying to push, I think, firms to provide the right information, but also as a byproduct of that, we want to be able to action that information to be able to convert those leads or those inquiries or those new prospects into actual paid clients. So that's why we're doing what we're doing, because we think the market's going to shift towards law firms eventually generating their own work as opposed to sort of relying on other third-party sources a lot of the time, where you get, I would say, probably a higher portion of complaints coming through just because there's a lack of transparency at the beginning about what's going to happen, within the transaction. So this could be down to not letting customers know about sort of additional fees, for example, what the process is, timeframes, which is quite a big one. So we try and cover all of that information on behalf of the law firm. I think that's really, really key, for people to make an informed decision about who they're going to go with.
And we sort of covered that off all in. As soon as a law firm wants to work with us, we have quite a intensive onboarding process, when you say, PJ, where we get to the bottom of how they work, like their fees, etc. Yeah, so I think that contributes to quite a lot.
We essentially adopt that law firm as our own. So it's important to basically make sure we get information about, say, for example, what their onboarding process is, how do they check the source of funds, what the ID process is, who's going to be taking on the work, what the money in account is, how that's actually paid to the client. And we, what our team essentially does on behalf of that law firm as a branded quote team, we explain that all to the client from the outset. So it's transparent. The client knows exactly what's going on. There's less likelihood of complaints coming through because of that. And ultimately, it makes for a much, much more smoother service. We tend to find a lot of the problems when it comes to conveyancing happens in the outset because information is not being basically shared. That's what we're trying to change here. And we are seeing a lot less complaints coming through with the law firms that we're working with compared with some of the sort of panel management sort of solutions out there. And that's the feedback that we're getting from law firms at the moment. So it's working pretty well.
I want to drill into what you said there about pricing transparency and routes to market, because reading between the lines, what I think you're saying is that in your view, firms will come under greater pressure to develop their own business rather than using third party, whether it be panels, whether it be comparison sites, that kind of thing. Is that where you're going with this, PJ?
Potentially. I think it depends on the market. Look, there's a lot of information that's thrown out online when people are trying to generate quotes. And I think what we want to collectively do is make sure there's a better outcome in the market of conveyancing. It is the most complained area of consumer law at the moment. So the question is, how do we get that down? How do we reduce those complaint rates? How do we make sure there's more time for conveyancers to focus on, the completion side as opposed to dealing with the actual issues, which happens a lot. And so you get this bottleneck situation where they're not able to get enough completions out because they're dealing with the problems. Bit by bit, what we're trying to do is get back control for the law firms. How we can do that is essentially we can explain to the client what the process is. We can make it very dead clear. We can do it at the firm's fees as well. And it all starts right from the beginning, just like with anything. We've got to set that right expectations, right from the off. And, the people that we have on our sales teams that work with the law firms, a lot of these guys are conveyancing trained. They've worked in the industry before. It's just sort of honing down some of those skills. Some of them are ex-branch managers with estate agencies, very well-known estate agencies. So they have experience within sales, they have experience within the property market in general. And we look for sort of key skill sets with stuff like this. It's not just a case of getting any of a person, or anyone out there on the street. It's really, really specific in terms of the type of people that we try and take on that will work with these law firms, because ultimately it comes down to making sure that all the information is correct. From a compliance perspective, everything is absolutely spot on. The information that's been provided is absolutely spot on. So conveyancers can actually do what they do best, which is, the legal work.
There's always a tension here between estate agency, sales progression, the introduction of the work to the conveyancer, and then that whole communications piece with the client as well. Where does Conveyancer Plus start and finish on that transaction timeline?
Yeah, so we have multiple different lead sources that we get it from, such as Really Moving, which is one of our exclusive lead gen providers, but we also help them with their own sort of website lead generation. So a lot of firms that we speak to have been stung before by marketing agencies who promise them the world in terms of Google ads and lead gens. These can be the best leads in the world. We help them look at their organic strategy and paid strategy, and also help them generate leads that way as well. Yeah, we're right at the forefront of kind of the client acquisition.
You talk about sort of the client onboarding piece, but then there's a piece where the solicitor has to remain in touch with the client. You guys don't particularly get involved with that. Do you purely do the BD bit for the firm?
Once we've converted the lead on behalf of the law firm, we then send an onboarding and introduction email to the client, and then also the law firm as well. So we introduce the law firm and say who we are, but also on the handover, we are then also responsive. So we do have a phone number if they do want to get back in touch with us, if there are any issues with the law firm as well.
Again, we just play more of a supportive role, I think, in that instance.
Yeah,
yes.
makes sense.
The control is with the law firm. David, we know that how panel management works. Typically what you tend to find is a lot of the control is with the actual panel manager, because they're the ones that produce the work. What we're saying is it shouldn't be like that, because we're not the service providers. We are there just to introduce the work. It's the service providers that should be in control of how they want to deal with that particular client and with that transaction. So we don't impose the typical sort of SLAs that you normally would expect, because it's important that we are not involved or seen as being involved once sort of we've passed the instruction over. So we make sure the client is financially committed to that firm before the work starts. And I think that's absolutely key, but then the firm essentially just takes it on from there.
George, you talked about your role being an element of the technology piece as well. I sense here that given what you said about the way that you interact with the client, you speak to them and that kind of thing, that that interpersonal skill is a key element of your offering. There's a lot of discussion around replacing people with tech in conveyancing, but I sense from the conversation we're having here that you guys really feel as though that personal touch is important.
Yeah, it's literally the core of our business pretty much. A lot of people will sell the world, like I said, like we were saying earlier, a lot of agencies will kind of, here's my amazing email automation that will convert your lead straight away, and here's my SMS follow-up sequence. But at the end of the day, you can go and check our kind of Google reviews. I think we're up to nearly, probably should be around 200 now, but every single Google review is literally commenting on, it was so good to speak to Andy. I was so confused at this point as a first-time buyer. I just needed to be able to pick up the phone to someone straight away and talk to them. Like, conveyancing is so complex for someone who's like not done it before, or who isn't an estate agent, who hasn't worked in it before. So being able to speak to someone that is going to listen to them, and we're not trying to sell hard. We do just sit and listen and explain the process.
The way that conveyancing quotes generally sort of, first-time buyers, when they go online and they want to sort of get a quote, typically get a quote from the estate agent as a recommendation. They typically get a quote from the mortgage broker. But then also a lot of the time they go online. They want to do their due diligence by looking at sort of reviews. They want to generate other quotes for comparison websites. The way that sort of process works is a little bit strange, because it's very similar to when you generate a car insurance quote or a travel insurance quote. So you naturally think, okay, it's going to be very similar. The difference between the two, however, is paramount. If you're looking at a car insurance quote, you get a policy at the end of the day. You're literally looking for the cheapest price possible based on the based on the information that you've inputted into their algorithms and their forms. Whereas with conveyancing, you're actually dealing with people. You're dealing with a service that matters, where there's a lot at stake. There's hundreds of thousands of pounds, sometimes even millions of pounds at stake in the property transactions. Why would you then not do your due diligence on the law firm that's going to get you to completion and get your keys, for example. So for us, it's absolutely important that people actually realize the importance of actually choosing a good solicitor. So we made that really, really clear in our conversations. These are the reasons why. This is what you should be looking out for. We don't necessarily say you've got to go with us, and that's not the sales approach that we take. It's more of a case of, this is why it's important. What do you know about conveyancing? Is there an understanding there to begin with? Because a lot of the time there's not. So that's where we come in. So it's more of a case of they want to be able to speak to someone to answer some of these questions. A lot of the time, based on the information they read for 5 minutes, for example, online, they think they can complete within 2 months, not taking into account all the different sort of variables that could affect how quickly or how slow they can complete. So we have to make that really, really clear to them. Sometimes you've got to be honest about the truth. We're not here just to basically give them falsehoods so we can win the instruction. It doesn't work like that, because at the end of the day, it affects our reputation, it affects us, it affects the law firm. And we are there to support the law firms. They go hand in hand. So it's important that we get the right sort of information. It's important that clients are aware of what is actually going to be happening.
Let's move on to the current sort of market dynamics. We're talking at a point in time where stamp duty reliefs have ended, thresholds have decreased again, and there's a lot of conjecture about the sort of health of the market currently. I guess because you guys are talking to home movers on a regular basis, or prospective home movers on a regular basis, you've probably got a decent sense of what the sentiment out there is at the moment. Can you give us any indication as to how busy the market is in your view?
We've had record month upon record month this year. I think from our perspective, we're as busy as ever. We're hiring more people. We're getting a lot more inquiries from law firms to be able to help them, with their onboarding and with their instruction process, and even with sales coaching as well. So for those firms that have got their own sales teams that may not be converting as well as they should be, we're sort of providing sort of hints and tips and guides and listening to some of those calls and just providing sort of action plans for some of their team members to be able to convert better. It just means more revenue for the law firm. So it's an absolute no-brainer and more ROI. So for us, it's busy, and I expect it to be probably even busier. We know that law firms are looking at ways how they can reduce their marketing spend, but get more sort of bang for their buck. Where we can sort of increase the conversion rates, even if it's organic on their website, for example, if it's through sort of comparison sites, if it's through sort of other channels such as working with the agents or their own mortgage brokers, we can absolutely help them. But for us, we've not seen a dip in the market for a good few months now. We're busy, we're converting very well. We saw record conversion rates across the board last month and the month before. For us, we're in a good place, and I think law firms want to be able to trust and work with partners that are going to provide them with good quality work. I think that's what it comes down to. But no, we haven't seen so much of a dip yet. Interest rates have just lowered. We're probably expecting it to be slightly busy in about 1 or 2 weeks. So once everyone sort of goes back to their brokers or re-engage with new rates, we're expecting an influx of people to start instructing law firms once again. So we're expecting to hopefully see the benefit of that.
Some of our key partners, a lot of law firms, when they do see these busy periods like the stamp duty deadline that's kind of just passed, they just fluctuated with work and they just overload. It's taken a while, but some of our partners have kind of come around to seeing our way of doing things, that they just kind of shut off the tap and then they're like, no more work, we don't want any more work. Now we're kind of helping them manage like the workload and just making sure that there's a consistent stream of work coming through. So when it does die down again, like it inevitably will, sort of December time, and there is enough work that's going around.
It's a vicious cycle that we tend to find again and again and again. So when law firms are busy, they take on the work, and then suddenly when they're sort of at capacity, they put a stop on all the work. But then what happens is a lot of the conveyancers within the firms, they also tend to put a stop on the work as well. So they end up leaving, they get stuck. A lot of that work, if that case handler that has just left, for example, had 80 odd files, that gets spread out to a team who are already at full capacity anyway. And that causes more people to leave. You're then in this sort of hiring process as quickly as possible, where you're willing to pay as much as possible just to get people on board. But then they're having to sort of train on the system. So it's a good sort of 2, 3, 4 months until they actually start billing properly well for you. But in that time, you're not taking on any work because you can't. So you miss out on those completions, say 4, 5, 6 months later. So when it comes time to actually bill and pay these new people, there's not a lot of money in the pot. So it's a vicious cycle that we see time and time again. all that we're saying is, and what's important is maintain that instruction level. Make sure you've got a good completion pipeline coming through for the next few months, and just make sure that you understand your numbers and your data, and you're monitoring that consistently with the case handlers. How many live files does everyone have? What's on hold at the moment? How many people have cancelled? You'd be surprised how many law firms that we come across where when you ask that question, they don't have a clue. They look at the numbers as this is how many files this person's at, but that's a combination of live files, it's a combination of inactive files, on hold, recently cancelled files, because they don't want to take on more files. That's the reality of it that we tend to find. I appreciate it's not going to be the same for every law firm, but the majority of law firms that we speak to, we see the same sort of trends again and again. So I think it's important to have a consistent level of work coming through, and sort of just keep preparing, and be proactive as opposed to reactive to what's happening in the market.
I think there are times when people don't fully appreciate what good looks like. And to your point around some of the stats and numbers that firms may not be measuring. You talked about record conversion rates, for example. I mean, in your experience, what does good look like when it comes to converting new clients? What's the percentages of people working to that are doing a good job?
Vacancy Legal Recruitment, a refreshingly unique and personal talent agency developed specifically for legal. Dedicated to the sector and with extensive experience working across legal services and legal technology, we bridge the gap between your requirements and top-tier legal talent. Get in touch today and say hello at vacancy.co.uk.
It's a good question. So that depends on the source of work, because every source of work will give you different percentages. So, for example, if you're working with estate agents, a lot of the estate agents actually will speak to clients on your behalf and just recommend the fact that, hey, you need to be working with this solicitor. We work very closely with them and get things done fast. It's a typical sort of pitch that we tend to hear from estate agents, because it's the recommendation from the estate agent, and because that buyer or seller wants to make sure that instruction goes through correctly without any sort of anything happening or the transaction falling through. More than likely, you're going to see a higher conversion rate of those referrals. Typically, what you tend to find in the market is it's generally about sort of 70 to 8% on the agents and mortgage broker referrals. We're converting at around about 95% at the moment on anything that's coming through. And the reason why we're converting higher is because we explain the process as well to the customer or to the prospect, and we make it sort of clear about what's going to happen. Answer those questions, answer some of those concerns that they might have, for example, about the process or what actually happens, and really sort of delve into the questioning side of things. If you're looking at, say, comparison websites, typically in today's market, not so much sort of 10 years ago, but probably today, you're looking at around about, I'd say, 5% conversion rate on the leads. The cost of those leads obviously a lot lower. You're paying per lead, and you're looking at a cost of quite a bit off the back of that in terms of sort of revenue per transaction, but you are seeing a 5% conversion rate. It's a volume game for a lot of law firms to actually, focus on bringing, working with sort of comparison engines. What we're doing at the moment is we saw a record conversion rate of 28.8% through a couple of law firms. Typically, we see around about 23% as an average across the board. So we have some firms that are converting slightly less than that, and some firms are converting slightly higher than that. We've got an algorithm which we work by, which works really, really well in terms of really maximizing that conversion as best as possible. So when we're speaking to firms, we let them know, we give them suggestions about things they can change organically, about their website, which is really, really important. It's not just about, yes, you've got a team now, they're going to convert for you, they're going to convert at higher fees, etc., etc., etc. There is stuff that we need to do in the background to make sure we're able to absolutely do that and do it correctly as well. It's all about the engagement rates. The more number of people that we can get through to, the more conversations we can have, the higher the conversion rates. It's a age-old thing that we work by. If you're dealing with sort of website requests and phone calls coming through from your firm, they will probably sit in between, in the middle. So typically, most firms will convert at around about 30 to 40% of website leads. We're converting at around about 60% at the moment. So we're doing pretty well. You're always going to find those people that will get multiple quotes, directly from the website, but then comparison engines and sort of different forms. And then, it's just making it clear to them that this is what they need to be looking out for. So there's a real sort of conversation to be had, but we tend to find that, people who've generated quotes directly on the website, their engagement rate tends to be a lot higher compared to sort of comparison engines, who are just a lot of the time looking to reduce the cost with, say, for example, a quote that they received for an agent, and then using the comparison quote to be able to do that. So they're all sort of different in the way that they work, but I think working in tandem, there's ways in which we can really sort of maximize, law firms' conversion rates.
I think that's really important to note as well, that when we start working with firms, just a few tweaks that we can make, like PJ was saying, on their Google My Business or their website, within the next month we've almost seen a double percent increase in their conversion rate. And these are small tweaks that just, as a conveyancer, you probably wouldn't pick up, but as a consumer, you're straight away looking at the reviews, looking at the style of the website. Is it too slow? Does it look like it's from the 1990s? Yeah, so it's just these quick changes that aren't necessarily a sales thing that we also recommend that firms do when they join us. It just instantly can help improve conversions.
Yeah, I mean, we're driven by the customers' sort of behaviors online. What are they constantly looking at? That's really, really important, because they're the ones who drive that, conversation about changing, how things look to make it more accessible for them. So say, for example, 5 or 6 years ago, there might be more content led. Now it's more about, right, what's the color style on the website, for example? How does it make me feel? What does the team look like, for example? So there's sort of key instances which we've noticed changes on. They prefer more text-based conversations as opposed to actually speaking on the phone. What they realize is, to make a big decision like this, there's a lot of misunderstanding, and they will probably have to end up speaking on the phone anyway. So this is one of the key reasons why we tend to do quite well, is because we have that element where it's text-based. We have through our automations and through the purpose-built system that we've got in place, but we have AI triggers in place as well, so we're able to sort of identify where there's going to be higher engaged clients. But we also speak to them. We also let them know, hey, look, this is what the next steps are. This is what to expect in the transaction. We let them know about sort of key questions that need to be answered and things they need to be looking out for. One of the key things that people really constantly, if you look at some of the reviews with firms online, it's always the same things that I mentioned. If it's 1-star reviews, it's always communication. And the reason why it's communication is because that's what people understand. They don't understand the legal jargon. They don't understand technicalities of conveyancing and the way it works. They pay the conveyancer to be able to do that. But what they understand, what they resonate with, is how quickly will they get back to my email? What's the tone of the email that they're responding by? I've just left a missed call. When am I going to get that back? So they based their service experience on what they understand.
We give them on the way, and the customer get the options of how they want to speak to us. Do they want to carry on talking over text? Do they want to speak on WhatsApp? Do they want to carry on email? But like PJ said, 80% of the time they want to pick up the phone. And I've just pulled up the stats here from one of our clients, and of the 200 leads that we've generated, I think, in the last week, the average call duration to those 200 leads was 8 minutes and 17 seconds. And that's not a closed lead, that's every single lead that we're talking to. Some might convert, some might not. But if you're looking at a law firm having to deal with that volume of leads and having not necessarily a large law firm with a sales team, they're not going to be able to get round to making that or carving out that time to speak to the client in such a big way.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I think absolutely, you're 100% right with that. And I think typically what we tend to find is when law firms sort of adopt a sales approach, it's typically the paralegal or the receptionist that generally sort of tries to call a lot of those leads. But what tends to happen is they call those leads a few hours later after they've been generated, because they're busy doing a lot of the stuff, the support element stuff for the case handlers. And they only follow up once. We generally sort of say to our sales teams, the fortune is in the follow-up. And it's not just one follow-up per lead. You've got to follow up at different times, and it's going to be at different days. You've got to follow up as well, because we've got to understand sort of the mindset of the customer here. When they've generated a quote, within the first sort of 10 minutes, they're doing a lot of their research out there as well. So should we follow up within 10 minutes? I would say probably, yeah, within sort of the first 15 minutes while it's fresh in their mind, and they've probably got a load of questions that they want to answer. And we've got to sort of understand their thinking behind this. If they're not picking up the phone within the first 15 minutes, they might have just quickly generated a quote, gone back to work, and then it might be worth just trying to reach out to them, a couple of hours later, or possibly even at the end of the day as well. And it's the times that are really, really key here. So it's not just within sort of working hours. You want to be able to get hold of people at times that they're available, because it's about the customer, it's about the client. It's not about us trying to do it within our sort of timeframes. We've got to be flexible enough to actually speak and have these conversations when it's convenient for the prospects. because we're doing this on behalf of the customers out there as well. So there is a method to the madness in terms of what we do. It's not just, calling people and just pitching them and sort of promoting their services. It's absolutely doing it in a very, very structured manner. That's key. And it's consistency. It's then tweaking it to see what's working, what's not, constantly looking at the data. So we really, really go in depth with this. I mean, it's a system that we've, spent sort of 2 years building, and we're constantly refining every single week, looking at the data, looking at sort of engagement rates, looking at things that could affect the actual engagement rates, looking at outside circumstances or outside influences, what's happened sort of with interest rates, why stuff might have died down for a couple of days, for example, why it might have not. And because of that, we've got all of this intel, which is basically just a conversion machine. So what we are doing, we've absolutely refined the element of converting a lead into an instruction to the point where now we're scaling up aggressively. And, we've got a lot of law firms that are actually now understanding what we're trying to do, and they're employing our services. We've had a couple of firms, for example, where they've had their own in-house teams and we're converting 3 times higher than them. So things happen for a reason, and there's a reason why we are doing the numbers that we are. But we understand, it's not always easy for a law firm to adopt their own sales function. So it's comes out.
Yeah, and even building on that, like PJ was saying, it's normally like the smaller firms, like a receptionist or an admin person that's working from 9 o'clock to 5:30. What we're actually finding, and we call it the witching hour, is that 5:30 till 7 o'clock is when we get the best conversions and the best conversations. Getting into the mind of the customer, it's like they're normally coming home from work, they're driving home, they're on the back end of a commute, they've just got the kids' tea done. That's the kind of best time to talk to a customer. If you're running a law firm, are you going to be able to persuade someone to stay past 5:30 and try and catch those leads, especially if it's on a really competitive lead that's from a comparison website where you are competing against other prices as well. So
one of the most interesting stats from the conversation here today is that time that you spend on the phone to a client. And I just wonder how many firms really understand that spending 8 to 10 minutes on the phone to a client is really, really valuable, a worthwhile investment. And equally, how many can afford to do that given the volume of work that they're already dealing with as well. But great to have you both on the podcast and sharing some insight into this, a topic that goes round and round in circles constantly, especially as firms are looking to improve their ROI, improve their conversion rates and all that kind of thing. So thank you both for joining the podcast.
Thank you very much for having us on, David.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate that.
The Today's Conveyancer podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider, also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to PJ and to George. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.